What's up, storytellers? I'm C.R. Rowanson, the magic engineer, and it's time to talk about magic. This time, this is part two or part three, depending on how we do it. It's the next video in the Spells and Specialist series that I've been doing with Lovis Geyer. And in this series, we use magic and stories to teach technical topics and communicate science because we had to have a tongue twister for an intro. Now, if you're new to the series, you should definitely check out the introduction video, which I believe will be over on Lovis's channel, Ecofictology. But right now, let's go ahead and go over to my co-host and your eco-friendly Nagus, Lovis. How you doing?
Hi everybody. Yes, I'm Lovis. I run the YouTube channel Ecofictology, where I talk all about ecofiction, reading it, writing it, and how it can be used as a science communication tool. So that is my particular brand of nerdery. And yeah, I'm super excited to be back for part 2/3, depending. And we're super excited to have Moiya McTier back with us. Dr. Moiya McTier, excuse me, back. We didn't scare her away the first time, which is a good sign. That Apparently is a good sign.
Yeah. I don't scare away easily, but I'm happy to be here.
Do you want to give us a bit of another introduction in case the viewers haven't seen part one?
Yeah, sure. So I am Dr. Moiya McTier. I'm an astrophysicist. That's what I got my PhD in. So I'm a doctor of the universe, I guess. And I'm also a folklorist. And my favorite way to combine astronomy and folklore is through facts-based fictional world building, which I do with classes, workshops, and my podcast, Exolore. And I wrote a book that's coming out in August 2022, all about the history and evolution of the Milky Way galaxy, told from the galaxy's point of view. It's called It's called The Milky Way, an Autobiography of our galaxy.
I'm so excited to see that book.
I'm so excited. And when is that coming out?
August 16th, 2022.
Put the date in your diaries.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the Milky Way summer. I'm ready. The Milky Way's ready. It's going to be a great time.
And when it is out, potentially before it comes out, there will be a link in the description below. Make sure you click on show more so that you find the link. It will probably be below the fold. And with that, we can go ahead and launch into the recap of the previous parts because, you may or may not have seen that already. So with the very beginning, that's where we just let our specialists talk about their specialization, and we covered all kinds of crazy stuff about stellar evolution, how the stars form, the difference between stars and planets, these things called stellar nurseries, and I kind of went on a geeky tangent about thermodynamics and heat transfer when we talked about the rate of burning from stars, how bigger stars actually burn faster, and they have different internal structures, which is still super cool. And then we shifted on into identifying the seed crystal, which if you've been on my channel a while, you have heard me talk about seed crystals. You can find more information about that in any number of other videos. It is the point of inspiration for a magic system. And that's what this video is going to be about. We are going to take everything we talked about from the first two parts, the seed crystal we identified, and we're going to now build a magic system so that with our last installment with Moiya, we can then map out a story that will help teach some of those topics that we originally talked about. The seed crystal that we ended up with, I still think it's super cool. I have been thinking about this a lot. It is that magic potential forms into miniature stars that determine the nature of a person's or creature's magic. And I'm really excited to get into this. There were some other aspects that came up related to this. I have some notes here, but Lovis, Moiya, if you have things that you want to toss in while we're going through this, feel free. I know one of the things I was interested in, because I've been reading a lot of Lit RPG, was the idea that creatures are actually, specifically monsters, might actually be fueled by these stars, because monster cores are a really big thing in Lit RPG. So these stars may actually be the monster cores, which I think is super awesome. And all of this kind of pivots around the idea of everybody, or at least every magic user, having their own personal magic star.
Yeah, I think since I've been thinking about this a lot as well since we filmed the first part, and the image that just gets stuck with me is everybody walking around with their own little personal star, like hovering over their shoulder, and they're all kind of glowing a different color, and you just kind of what it does to social dynamics, because you can judge a person from a distance, right? Because you can see the star and you can see some characteristics about the star, so you know what kind of magic they have or how powerful or how whatever, so just some of the social dynamics were really interesting to me, and for some reason I have them in like a gladiator arena, like Pokemon that are fighting each other. I don't know why.
I
I
think
don't
that
know
was
if
the
that was something
original.
that came out, but
I think that was the original image that I kind of
okay,
presented to you guys.
but that has been in my head for a while now.
Yeah, it does have strong Pokemon vibes. It has strong Damon vibes from the Golden
Yes.
Compass series. And I would be interested in seeing, depending on how we actually build the system and what the rules in place are, like, would people hide their stars? Would they try and steal each other's stars? So like I'm interested in this monster core thing, Clark. That sounds really cool. I'm wondering if we can incorporate like supernovae and black holes into that. Like maybe monsters form when the
I have that in my notes to talk
there you go.
about. Is
Okay, you are
supernovae is
already
from
there.
somebody's personal star got supernovae.
Right. So like if you burn out your magic, then it can turn you into a monster. And I'm thinking of like Niffins from the Magician series.
Oh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lots of cool stuff to work with here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now that we've got the excitement level up.
Very excited. This is going to be great. We're actually going to, I don't want to say tone it back, but we're going to sort of zoom out a little bit and focus less on some of the specifics in terms of rules, patterns, and limitations. We already have some of the patterns, which is going to be the stellar formations, classes of stars, and the life cycle. Those are some built-in structures and patterns that will be followed by this final system. And I want to be clear, we're not going to end up with a completely fleshed out magic system in the 30 minutes to an hour that we have here. That's not enough time, especially when I'm involved. It's just not enough time. But we're going to zoom out and look at the magic system blueprint, which again, I've got other videos about that in my channel. And that's actually one of the things I talked about when I first met Moiya and was on Exolore. So let me go ahead and pull that up.
People still say that that's their favorite episode, by the way. It's a great introduction. It's one I often show people if they're like, oh, what's your podcast about? Well, here's this great series of episodes with Clark.
That makes me very happy to hear.
It's so good. And it was something I was listening. I was like, wow, he's not holding back any information. Sometimes when people have like published a book, they'll give you the gist of it, but they want you to buy the book to get all of it, right? And you were just so generous with everything. And it just made me want the book even more. So it was like a really good strategy.
I don't like to hold that. I don't like to hold that back. There's too much here. I just want to let it out, because if those talks aren't enough, that's what the book is for. And then if the book isn't enough, that's what I am for, and my consultations are for. So, so you guys should be able to see.
Yes, we can see.
All right. So anybody who hasn't seen it before, this is the magic system blueprint, and it's so nice and pretty, and I'm very happy with it. Ignore where the dials and sliders are right now. That was from some other work that I was doing, but I've already put in a rough name, which is just Spells and Specialists with Dr. McTier and Personal Stars and Stellar Evolution. Perspective is not going to be as important here. It might be more important when we start talking about story ideas. But at the moment, we're just going to be looking at it high level. We're the creators looking at it as a distant whole so that we see the larger patterns. The first thing we have to talk about is the type of magic. Now, just a quick recap on that. This hard and soft axis, well, for anybody who is familiar with it is currently the more common, I'm hoping to change that, the Sanderson version of hard and soft magic kind of runs along the diagonal here. And when I'm talking about hard and soft, this is the percentage of the magic system that is known or understood. And one of the examples I use in my book on the blueprint is if you had a podium with two buttons, if you hit one button, you know 50% of the magic system. If you hit both, you know 100% of the magic system, and it is now an extremely hard system. Soft magic systems are your things like Dresden Files, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings, where you don't know what might be around the next corner. So that's hard and soft. Rational and irrational is all about the ability to extrapolate and predict unseen portions and unseen applications of the magic based on what has been shown. If your assumptions and predictions are often true, it is more rational. If you can't trust your assumptions and predictions, then it is usually irrational. So, with that, what kind of system are we looking at? With the three scientists, I don't think we're going to be dipping into the irrational side.
Super soft irrational, I think, is our jam, right?
Yeah, that point is totally in the right spot.
Yeah, right there in that bottom left corner.
I want to fight all of my instincts to just put it way at the top right, because that's not going to be very interesting and it's not going to be a stretch of my imagination. So, in the top right quadrant, but not all the way up there. Yeah, I would maybe move it a little more towards soft, because there's so much about down.
Right.
Yeah,
because there's my own axis.
Because there's a lot that we still don't know about stars. We still don't know what exactly makes the distribution of stellar masses the way that it is. We still don't know exactly what's happening in their cores. We still don't know exactly what happens when they go supernova. So there's still a lot we don't know, but what we do know, we can use to make educated guesses about what will happen. So I think that it is pretty rational and like kind of hard.
Right. And yeah. I said we weren't going to deal with perspective much, and I apparently lied, because I'm just going to bring that up right away, that I think for us, it is definitely going to be in that hard rational quadrant. When we get to talking about the story, we can use smoke and mirrors and narrative shenanigans to basically place this wherever we want.
Narrative shenanigans.
Yes.
It's a term I'm going to use forever now because I like
it. That will be the
the
title of the last part of this series. It'll be narrative shenanigans.
Oh, that's great. What do you think, Lovis? Is that feeling
I
right?
like that. Yes.
Okay.
And I like that you even have a justification for putting it there. Not just I want to push myself, but we don't know enough about stars to say that it's a completely hard rational system. I like it.
That's part of what would really come through in the story, is depending on how much into the detail you wanted to dig. So the less information we present and the less that the people in the world know, the softer it's going to feel. So they may have some very vague ideas of, we know that kind of star has potent magic and that kind of star has weaker magic, and that's all they've got. That's not a ton. It won't be until they really start researching and mapping this out on the same level that we have our understanding of stars for it to become more of a hard system. That said, I'm thinking it will probably end up there, because one of the things you wanted to teach with the story were these concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's likely that all of that would come across in the final story. Next up is Transference. So Transference is just all about the ability to pick up and hand off or exchange the magic intentionally. A lot of your magic systems, your traditional magic systems, are lower transference because you're born with it or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
What are we thinking here? I've got a couple thoughts, but I don't want to bias anybody.
I want people to steal other people's stars. I do. And I'll give more justification for this. Out in space, most stars aren't alone. They're in pairs or triplets, or even more than that. And when you have so many stars close together, they exchange material. And so I think that it would make sense for these star powers to be exchanged. There's not really, like, stars don't steal things, but people do. So yes, let's have them steal power. And maybe there can also be like less vicious transference of power, like a voluntary one.
Yeah. I liked what you said about stars passing nearby and them actually exchanging some matter.
Mm-hmm.
So you could end up with a thing, and this is the stuff that could potentially drive it softer, where I just wrote down a subtle exchange of powers between stars and people.
Mhm.
So people who are in very close relationships or in close proximity, there might be minor reflections of the other person's power in their own. Not enough to change everything, but
Mm.
just if I primarily work with ice, and then rather than just forming, and I'm working around somebody who does a lot of fire, I'm not going to suddenly be dealing with fire, but my ice might start looking less like icicles and more like frozen shards of flame. Anyway,
Ooh.
that's where my head is going, but I really like that.
Yeah.
Nice.
I like that too. I'm like scribbling like mad over here because there's so many ideas already. Because with this, what you said about like when they pass each other, is it like a gravitational thing that they
Oh,
pull
Hmm.
pieces? Oh, there you are.
this relates to another thought I had about transference, because transference is part of it is how you initially get the magic, right?
Hmm.
And so often we see stories where it is connected to puberty, right? And for good reason, because having children running around with powerful magic is almost as bad as having adults run around with powerful magic.
Almost.
Almost. So, but we have a scientific way that we can put that there. If everybody is born with their own personal magical potential, and depending on the region they're in that has different levels of magical potential, their personal star may form over the first 12 to 15 years of their life.
Mm.
So
Does
that's
take stars time to form before they start fusing.
yeah. So
Pre-main
that's
sequence stars.
yes, exactly. So that's the initial stage, and people their magic star generally hits the main sequence about the time they hit puberty. Maybe there's some resonance there, or maybe it's coincidence, but
Hmm.
I thought
I
that would be
like it.
super cool.
Yeah. Just picking up on the note that you made about relationships, like I wonder if that could reflect, if you're in kind of maybe a toxic relationship, does it actually drain away power from your star? If you're with someone with like a really
Mm.
dominant star and your star doesn't like match up as well, does that actually drain? Or do people like huddle in particular groups? Like, do they form cliques based off of their stars because
Uh,
there's like safety in numbers because they can like protect each other and protect their own stars from people stealing them. And
Ooh.
this, I mean, if you can take somebody's star, going back to what you said about stealing stars, I mean, that brings a whole wealth question out there because if a person, can you hoard stars? Is there a limit to how many
Hmm.
stars you can have? Because
Hmm.
then surely wealth would be, and power in the society would be determined by how many stars you have and, how many people you've taken them from and if you can
Yeah.
willingly give them up or not.
so going back to the stealing, I do like the idea of stealing stars. I think it should be a difficult process to do
Agreed.
without destroying both people.
I agree. I agree.
Because
Yeah.
basically you have to take this other person's star and combine them into a stable orbit between each other and around you.
I mean, or like maybe you have multiple stars, but maybe also the stars merge.
Right, but like doing
Yeah.
doing that safely is tricky.
Yeah. Either way, it should be difficult and dangerous, but there are options there, whether
Yeah,
you just end up with multiple stars to yourself or they merge and become one bigger star.
yeah. And for
Is that
anybody,
what happens with real stars if they kind of like collide? Can they collide?
They can collide. Yeah, we've seen neutron stars merge, and they don't usually leave behind another type of star. It would probably be like a black hole type thing, but they are these really energetic cataclysmic events that produce a lot of the heavier elements in the universe.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they produce different elements. So we were talking about the type of magic you have being dependent on the elements in your star. So if
Mm-hmm.
merging them creates new ones, then you actually give yourself different magical abilities
Yeah,
so you can like pick and choose whose star you want to get a certain type of magic that you don't have yet.
So 2 quick side notes just about the magic building process, because I'm probably going to jump in and do this. I want, as awesome as this is, I also want to be throwing out tidbits for anybody watching to help them with their system. The reason I said that this should be hard, it should be hard to steal somebody's personal star. It doesn't have to be, but if it's not, you are likely going to end up with a very split society where the people with power are going to take these stars by force from everybody who's not in power. And then you would need to introduce other limits to prevent all of this upper class from being gods, unless that's the story you want to tell. That's the story you want to tell. You can do that. But that's kind of why we want this in there, is I'm thinking we'll get to prevalence next in a second. But if we want any kind of even distribution, it needs to be dangerous to not just to the person they're stealing from, but to the person doing the stealing. Otherwise, that would not be a deterrent.
Yeah.
Also, if you are watching and you're familiar with my 7 stages, we're kind of in a weird place because we are both doing idea generation and alignment at the same time. Mostly more what we're doing is we're going through the blueprint, doing a bunch of idea generation with the alignment in mind, because that's what we did with the first video, is coming up with the topics that we want to repeatedly align to. And okay, so with that, that means there may be some ideas that we throw out that don't hold together. There might be contradictions or things that don't quite work, and that is fine for the stage we're at. There's stuff that might or might not make it into the very final stage of this magic system we're building. Just something to bear in mind, because I then wanted to talk a little bit more about the components of the stars, because with transference, part of that is control over gaining the magic and control over the nature of the magic. And if we wanted to, there's a whole rabbit hole we could go down where there might be, whether it actually works or not, there could be entire philosophies and sciences in this world that they think they can somewhat control the type of star that forms.
Ooh,
so
yeah.
Like they just have you carrying around a specific metal all through your childhood because they think it will lead to a specific type of star.
I like that.
Lots that you could explore down that route.
For sure.
Which would be super cool. The other thing I wanted to talk about is we were talking about potentially monster cores, even if this isn't lit RPG. That's kind of what we're dealing with. It sounds like there would be a way to steal power from monsters, or at least harvest it. Does that seem right? Or
if the monsters are black holes, if their cores are black holes that have been formed from stars that burn too hot too fast, then I don't know. Part of me wants to say no, that you can't steal from monsters, but maybe you can control them in a way.
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely placed stuff to explore with monster cores depending on how we wanted to do that. Because part of my thought, generally monster cores in most stories end up just being little gems. My thought was that people might try and use monster cores as the key material for their personal stars. And try and use that to determine the nature of the effects they got, right? So if you are using the core of a Hydra, in theory, that would affect your star in a different way from using the core of a Gorgon or something like that. Don't know, just some stuff I wanted to throw out because so many possibilities. Okay, so that is one variable that we haven't even set yet. We've just been talking about it. But I think from everything we're talking about, this is sounding like, to me, this is sounding like medium transference, maybe medium high, depending on what happened with monster cores. What are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I think medium high.
Medium high?
Yeah.
The main reason I was thinking medium is because, yes, they can be transferred and stolen, but it's hard.
Oh, but it's difficult. Can we do midpoints?
We can. I usually just do these 5 points to keep it simple, but since we have the visual, there's no reason we can't put it like here.
Just change the system, Moiya. Don't worry about it.
I like breaking rules.
So that's transference. Next up is prevalence, which is all about how pervasive this magic is throughout the world. So this is where we get to talk and start throwing out ideas about how many monsters we want to be in the world, how many people have these stars and whatnot. And again, I have thoughts, I have notes, but I want to see what you guys think first.
I think everyone should have a star. Every single person should have a star, and the distribution of the stars should be the IMF. It should be the initial mass function that tells us that like 70% of stars are very low mass and like 10% are like the sun and very few are super hot and massive. So like very few people are super powerful. And those powerful people would be the ones that can go supernova and become monsters.
What was the IMF again?
It's called
initial
the
mass
function.
Okay.
Yeah.
Initial mass function.
Yeah, it's the equation. There are actually multiple initial mass functions. These are models that astronomers have made based on observing the distribution of stellar masses in different parts of the galaxy. And it's the equation that tells us when a patch of stars is born, what fraction of it will be low mass versus high mass.
So this ties into one of my ideas, and I'm very excited. We talked about the difference between stars and planets, and the main difference being whether they reach that fusion point and go into the initial sequence. So do some people just end up with planets instead of stars?
No, I think that it should be stars, because planets form around stars. It's not like if you have a cloud of gas that collapses, it forms some stars and some planets individually. Okay. Planets always form around stars.
Okay. This does tie into another question then. If that is the case, then do people end up less with a star and more with a solar system where they have a star and their own many orbiting planets?
What would the planets do?
I don't know. I have no idea. But I'm
That's
excited
a whole new can of worms.
I think that might make it too complicated.
I'm gonna put it down as an idea that might get stricken. But I just like the idea of some people having planets instead, and they might be the ones who, if you wanted to do the have and have nots, those would be the people who have not, because for whatever reason the magic potential wasn't high enough. If we wanted to go the other route, people could end up with the miniature solar systems around them.
I'm hesitant to do that, because where are you gonna stop? Like, will those planets have moons? And then what would that mean? So
I personally would stop around the planets. If it was me, because getting too detailed. The main reason I wanted to ask about the planets, because my initial idea was that you would then have some people who had planets instead of stars.
Yeah.
So then my thoughts there were that they don't generate their own magic, but they can be influenced and kind of deal with. They can generate magical effects when in proximity to stars. Was kind of what I was thinking. Again, that might be too complicated. Keeping it simple, we could just keep it with stars. I just thought this was a super cool idea.
It is a super cool idea.
Moiya made a face, like you got really excited though when Clark said something before he talked about planets. When you were talking about like this fusion point or something, Moiya, you got really excited. Like you had an idea of your own.
I did.
And then yeah. Oh
no, I don't remember.
Because I was saying, what if they don't reach that fusion point? I think she might have just clicked that I was going towards planets.
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
That's what it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's fine. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to lose it.
So with the IMF, the initial mass function, you said there was a specific percentage that was low mass stars?
Yeah, like 70%. So that means that I like this idea too, because then everyone in the world has some magic, but most people have very, very little magic. And so those are the have-nots, kind of.
And that's something that I definitely wanted to talk more because I am hoping that we will get through the blueprint and have time to discuss some of the ancillary portions of actual magic building, which would be the patterns and the rules a little more. Because I do have some thoughts on that. My main thought being like, what if the life cycle of your star is not as long as your personal life cycle? So if you have a high mass star, your magic is very, very potent, but it gives out partway through your life.
Yeah, and then you get the shadows, or you turn into a monster.
Yeah, and the people who have low mass stars, yeah, they're not as powerful, but you don't have to worry about turning into a monster unless somebody comes in and starts messing with your star and doing, I don't know, mass infusions. I don't know how that would
so
work.
the way that could happen, these low mass M stars, they eventually, after trillions of years, turn into white dwarfs. And if you have a white dwarf with another stellar companion that is more massive and is shedding some of its material, that material can fall onto the white dwarf and make it go supernova. So you can still have low mass stars that lead to supernova explosions, but only with the help of another star.
Okay. That brings us to...
I'm just going to scribble for a second.
I love when I say a space thing and then everyone's just like, just silence.
We just have to absorb the coolness of everything that you're saying.
Yeah. And Lovis, do make sure you're interjecting. I feel like I am just kind of... This is
your baby. You go for it.
I still want your ideas in here, though.
I know. Oh, you'll get them. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Next question,
when I have one, I'll let you know.
My next question was then going to be, what is the prevalence of monsters? And right here, I think, because I have a follow-on idea, but right here we're talking about monsters that stem from people transitioning to supernova / black holes.
There are way more black holes in our galaxy than people think there are. There are like 10 million solar mass black holes that form from supernovae of high mass stars. And the thing about black holes is that they live a lot longer than even the longest lived stars. So like, in a way, I kind of feel like if you do that, then if you go supernova and become a monster, you should be immortal, so that more monsters happen over time, but they can only form from about like 5% of stars.
Okay.
But if they never die, I mean, this place would be overrun by monsters, right?
They never die naturally, but they can be killed.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Like elves.
Right. Okay. And that's exactly what I was thinking when it was like with the immortalities. You just kind of sit there and they're hanging around until somebody deals with them. And they can be dangerous in any number of ways because they might be leeching the magic potential from the area.
That's what I was going to ask, because black holes pull things in, right? I know that actively, much about astrophysics.
But they're not like actively grabbing things in. They're a big gravity well. So things will fall into them if they are close enough.
Right. Which means if you have one that is old enough, aka the black holes become big enough, it could be leeching the magic potential from an entire region, which is then meaning weaker and weaker magic users are being born.
Yes.
Which means fewer monsters are created.
Yes. Now this does lead, so these are monsters that were once human. Do we want any other kinds of monsters and or wondrous creatures?
We can bring in the planets here if you want.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. Like if you this can be the brown dwarfs, and that's like the midpoint between a star and a planet is a brown dwarf that's not. It is fusing, but it's not fusing like the right type of hydrogen into helium. So they're almost a star. So maybe that would be like a minor monster, a minor creature.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. These would just be like mildly magical creatures that would probably be more heavily connected to their environment than anything else.
I love me a connection to the environment.
I know.
So like what would happen if somebody was like, befriended a dog who has a little planet, a little brown dwarf? Like what kind of magical ability would you gain if you had a really good friend who was a dog?
Or what happens in the far future when there is a radioactive wasteland and you get a number of creatures proliferating with brown dwarfs out there that then start coming into populated regions. Lots of fun stuff to do there.
Oh yeah.
But okay, so prevalence.
Are we going to move this little toggle at any point?
eventually, patience. I think prevalence here is going to be very high.
Yeah,
because everybody has it. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of magical creatures. There's going to be some of these. I'd want to come up with a more clever term around either supernova or black holes, or maybe quasars, about these specific brand of monsters that were once human. Plus, they would be the most dangerous because they would probably keep their human intelligence.
Oh yeah, that's scary. Human intelligence, but like their soul has burned out.
That is creepy.
as a side thing, this is a whole side thing that may or may not make it into the episode, but I did a couple episodes on the World Build With Us podcast, where the prompt was people fear the light as much as, in that world, people fear the light as much as we fear the dark. And it ended up leading to these weird creatures that are walking like bundles of radiation that burn away your emotions. And they burn it away and they consume what is released by it. And survivors end up having everything except a single emotion or drive burned away, and they're called burnouts.
Clever. I love that.
I like it.
They end up being monsters in their own right, because you have one person who has no other emotions or compunctions except for the drive to protect or the drive to feel loved. Anyway, that's a side thing that I just thought kind of thematically meshed here. All right. Source. So I think this one might be fairly straightforward, and I just have to find the right knobs. Oh, here we go. Because the main thing about internal and external, really what it comes down to with internal and external, which, by the way, when we're talking about source, we are talking about the path that the energy moves from where the magic sits to the generation of the magical effect. Not talking about the origins of the magic system in terms of created by the gods, formation of the universe, all of that. We're talking about when somebody produces magic, where does the energy come from and where does it pass through in order to generate this effect? I think here we're in a weird place where it could be external or internal. But one of the main things about external sources is that people, the magic users, can be cut off from it. So in Mistborn, I consider the metals they use, to be an external source, because if you cut off their supply to metal, they will run out of magic. And then in things like Harry Dresden, where even though his reserves can be depleted and there's stuff that can be done to interrupt it, his magic is inside him and you can't really cut him off from it. You can suppress it, but that's making it so he can't use it, not so that he can't access it. Those are different things. So here, that's where I wanted to kind of open this up and talk about how we wanted to treat this.
Can I jump? I mean, we mentioned demons. And the whole thing of that story is them cutting, sorry, spoilers, but
his dark materials.
His dark materials, cutting the demons away. Can you cut someone's star away from them?
Yeah, I think that's what stealing it.
Because you can steal it.
But short of stealing it, can you interrupt that flow? Like, because if I steal it, that's permanent.
Okay.
Which, like, that would be, in a sense, that would be like ripping out an extra organ that I have. Once you rip the organ out of my body.
As with the metal stuff, if there's no more metal, you can't do any more magic.
No, the difference is the metals are collected from outside you. Whereas this would be something, the daemons are actually, yeah, they're a solid comparison. I think they are internal because aside from cutting them away permanently, which is destroying somebody's ability to do magic in our system, you can't temporarily cut them off from their magic source.
Okay.
It's not like you can just put a wall between them and their star and all of a sudden they can't use their magic.
Yeah, I think that it is internal. It can be taken away, like someone can harvest your kidney, but it does belong inside of you.
Okay. So that may have been hard to see on the video, but I did change it so it is pointing up to internal. Real quick, because I forgot to do this while we were actually talking through stuff, got too excited. But if you are enjoying this so far, please do like and subscribe. It helps a lot. And do go check out Ecofictology and Exolore. And then we get to source. The other aspect of source, which is, because we're already on source, is how the reserves work, whether they are infinite, finite, or renewable. Very common with traditional magic systems where it's renewable because we want the mages to run out of magic partway through a situation, but not have it permanently cut off. Superheroes tend to be infinite because they can just use their magic as long as they need to. And then finite is far less common. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on where we thinking finite?
Well, because we're talking about how quickly they burn, right? And then when they burn out, it's kind of gone. So wouldn't that be a finite source?
It is. Here is the key question, though. Does using your magic speed up the degradation of your star? Because if the lifetime of your star is completely independent from how much magic you use, I would argue it's infinite. It's a set time frame, but it is infinite. Whereas if we made it so every time you use magic, you are drawing energy from your star and you're shortening its lifespan, that would be more finite. I personally am leaning towards the infinite because I think it's already, I think there's already enough kind of twists and turns. But part of that is because if I already have these things, it would be really annoying to go in, for me personally, if I had one of these high mass stars, it would be frustrating and terrifying enough to know that it was going to burn out one day. It would be even more terrifying to know that every time I used that, I brought that date closer. Now, if you were wanting to tell a horror story, that would be perfect for that. But
so you have this star and its mass and your magical strength and potential are determined from birth. And as long as that star is able to do its magical fusion, then you can access that power. But accessing it doesn't deplete it at all, is what you want to say.
That's what I was thinking.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Okay. You guys are all right with that? Cool. Then it is still infinite.
Because otherwise you get into really complicated math here. Like if you are, say, using your magic is like taking mass away from your star, taking material away from it, then your star is getting less massive, which means its burn rate is decreasing, so it will last longer. And then you get these complicated differential equations that I just don't want to think about.
So actually, the more you use it, the longer it lives, which doesn't actually make any sense.
Yeah, the longer it lives, but like the weaker your magic is, and that's just complicated.
That's a fair point, just for simplicity. Like even if you wanted to do it so where all you were doing was increasing the burn rate, that would, I think it is probably simpler for us to leave it with internal and infinite. So as long as your star is a star.
My hard rational brain is going now, though. I think if Brandon Sanderson was in this conversation, I think he would make that the magic
We've already got tons of areas to go super hard rational with this. So this is something that I want to mention, though, because a lot of times people really worry about running out of ideas and things getting overdone. I just want to point out I haven't found the best way to articulate it. But once you get the hang of exploring magic systems like this, you can start layering things on top of one another. And there's a lot of room here for us to layer things where you could build a magic system where something happens and people go into a different world, and forever, whatever reason, everybody is born with the exact same star. But now the deviation is that for whatever reason, they do have their own miniature solar systems. So there, the deviation between them is the planets. And that is a whole separate system that would have a completely different feel, especially if you change some of the presentation so that the star isn't floating next to them anymore. The star could be internal, which would be super cool, being lit up from the inside like that. But their planets actually orbit around them instead. Very different feeling system, but the same core concept, and could actually follow the same base rules that we're building up here. And I don't know. I think that is something that is super cool, is how you can start to layer your systems into like an infinite network. But I digress. Okay. Next is flux. Flux is the change in prevalence over time. Got positive, negative, and neutral. Now, neutral means that things are staying the same, or it means that the amount going out of the system is the same as the amount coming into the system. I don't know that that's something we're going to deal with. I think that's something very cool to explore, where one system is being replaced by another. But what are your thoughts? This is feeling very neutral to me.
Yeah, because there are more people being born with their own stars, but there are also people whose stars are burning out,
Right.
who don't have magic anymore. So
Yeah.
Seems pretty neutral.
Yeah, if we just say the magical energy in the world is constant, then it is just a matter of how it's distributed.
Mm-hmm.
You're smiling. What are you thinking?
This depends on the IMF, because I was thinking, out in the galaxy, how do we compare the formation rate of stars to the death rate of stars? And we never really talk about the death rate of stars, but that's because it depends entirely on the initial mass function. If you had an IMF that was more skewed towards heavy element or heavy stars, then those stars would burn up quickly. So there would be more stars dying than there are born, but we do have an IMF that is more weighted towards the low mass stars. So there aren't a lot of stars dying.
The more low mass stars you have, the fewer stars are going to die over the course of.
Because the low mass stars take so long to burn out.
Right. Which is interesting, because that would mean long term that as your population grows, the magic would become more stable and more consistent in this fashion.
Mm-hmm. Ask how, if heritability of these stars, of this magic, is it random when you're born, or if like your parents both have like super high mass stars, are you going to have a super high mass star? Because that would change the distribution of this.
It really would.
I had an assumption that I don't know that I voiced. I was assuming it was based entirely off of a combination of your personal magic potential, which is determined at birth, and the magic potential of the region you're in. Like the region you're in as you grow up, because your own potential is a miniature gravitational well. So if you're in an area that has lots and lots of matter for you to draw in, that's going to be easier for you to end up with a high mass star. That's kind of what I was thinking. So both.
Okay. Yeah. So your magical potential at birth, you said, is determined at birth, but what is that like? Does it depend at all on the magical potential that your parents had, or is it random? Is it like a personality thing?
I don't know. I think we could go any route we wanted at that point. And I don't know. It's something that we need to decide here, fortunately.
Yeah. I think it would be simpler if it's not inherited from parents. Again, just to avoid all of these differential equations that you would need to figure out the rates of formation and death. But I can't remember if it was you, Clark, or Lovis. Someone said that if you have a lot of low mass stars, then eventually the population will become more stable. That's not necessarily true because all of the humans, their lifespans are the same, right? It's just that their stars, basically, if you are a low mass star human, you can use your power your entire life.
So what happens?
But you're not
when
living
you die?
longer.
So sorry, would what you said, does that mean that in cities people are more likely to, because you said you're in the environment around you, so there would be a higher density of people, there'd be more stuff for you to gather, and that would then determine how big your star got? So are cities more likely to have bigger stars than like a village?
I think
not necessarily that.
I think to lean towards simplicity, I want to backpedal on what I said there.
Okay.
Because
no, Clark, I don't think you have to backpedal.
Well, the only reason okay, go ahead.
Because I didn't see it as like density of magical material in people, but almost like natural magic in the world, kind of like ley lines. And ley lines don't depend on geographical population density.
Okay.
Yeah. Although that's something that people would learn over time. So they would probably flock to these areas of high natural magical potential, but then they would deplete it. Right. So, yeah, I think that still stays pretty neutral.
I was more or less thinking of magical potential as the equivalent of space dust. So like when you're born, you are born with your own automatic cloud of space dust, and the size of that cloud is entirely that's random, that is predetermined. But then depending on where you live, depending on how much space dust is floating around, you can draw in more, increasing the chances of you being a high mass star. I don't know if that's making it too complicated, which is why I was thinking of maybe stepping back on that.
An interesting point about the space dust can bring in metallicity, because the regions of space with higher metallicity are the regions of space that have had more high mass stars die.
Can you say that one more time?
Yes, because metals, heavy metals, are formed inside high mass stars. When they die, they release those heavy metals into the environment, and that then gets created in new stars. So where you've seen more stars and more high mass stars, you have higher metallicity. So then the next generation of stars born there also has higher metallicity.
Okay. So it is entirely determined at birth, but where you're born can be a factor. Okay.
So then, okay.
So some regions like the ley lines will just naturally birth more high mass stars.
Yeah, but also where there are more people, therefore more people dying.
And that's where we've got to figure out what happens when you die. But I think we need to come back to that, because that's a whole complicated thing.
For now, Flux is neutral. Is that where we were?
Yes, Flux is definitely neutral. And that was something I was going to point out, is when you're doing the magic building process, you end up jumping around a lot. We're still primarily in idea generation, but for a bit there, we had jumped back into transference to talk some more details about that. Because, I'm going to put these thoughts out there, just kind of let it knock around in the back of your head. If the stars don't die, then there is incentive to murder people to take their stars that's remaining. Or they may just naturally dissipate, which could still incentivize murder if you use that in high enough scale to increase the overall magical potential of a region. Something to think about. At the moment, I'm leaning more towards the star just dissipating for simplicity, but
my brain just went to such a dark place.
Murder.
I am not helping with that, because I do dark all the time. This next one, though, I think is going to be really, really easy, and that is naturalness. Naturalness is about the magic's apparent connection to the world and the familiarity that people have with it. Because when it's been around a long time, people are more familiar. It feels natural, even if it in reality isn't. either way, however we look at this is going to feel natural both from a universe and physical sense, as well as any kind of emotional or psychological sense.
Yeah.
So that one's easy. Speaking of easy, we now have ease of use, which is how easy it is for people to use their magic effectively and safely, which we haven't really talked about that at all. So
no, we haven't talked about how you use the magic. How do you actually access the power?
Or what it does, which is one thing I love about the blueprint is we have such a strong understanding of what the system means for the world and our story, but we haven't actually decided any magical effects, which I just think is endlessly cool. I'm thinking from how we've been talking about this is probably relatively easy to use.
It feels like it would be very instinctual of how you use it. If your star is so personal to you and grows as you grow and everything, it feels like you would just know how to use it. But I don't know what kind of effects we're talking about.
Yeah, I think depending on how we end up with effects will determine where it falls between this medium high and high. So since we've already done this, whoops.
Breaking the system.
We're breaking the system.
That right in the middle there. We good with that? That look good?
Yeah.
Okay. Next we have reliability. So this is about repetition and trust. If you use the magic the same way over and over, how much can you trust for it to perform the same way?
I think it should be low. I think it should be low depending on the type of star you have, because different types of stars out in space have different levels of predictability. I'm specifically thinking of their magnetic activity. Like M stars, which are the low mass stars, they are very magnetically active, and it's hard to predict what their behavior will be. So it's hard to predict what their internal conditions are. Versus high mass stars, which are less magnetically active. But this also, has like the age of the star is important too. As stars get older, they get less magnetically active and more predictable.
What about radiation wise, or are there other parts of it that are more or less stable through ages of life or across types of stars? Or is it just the magnetic activity?
The radiation will also change over time, but on longer time scales. Again, depending on the star. Yeah, so it's more like magnetic activity, because if you start thinking about flares or star spots, that's all about magnetic activity.
Okay.
Magnetism and light and radiation, it's the same force anyway. It's electromagnetism. So
yeah. So what about this? I think going back to the idea of the star determining so much about you and your powers, especially if it gets into the material that comprises it, what if the effects are always constant? So what you do never changes, but the magnitude does. Like the magnitude and stability does, like in terms. So you may have times where you have the equivalent of sunspots or flares, which would be moments of it being higher or lower than normal.
Yeah.
So for example, if your magic was to like grow things, sometimes you could grow a tree and sometimes you can barely grow a shrub. Something like that.
Right. You may be used to growing something the size of of just a bush, a shrub. And then you go to do that one time and it turns into a big oak. Like, whoops, okay. That's what today's like, is it? Okay.
And I really...
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say I really like that, because that means that the weaker magic havers, the ones that are low mass stars, those are the most unpredictable. So you can have a weak magic haver who, like on a day that's very unpredictable, like all of a sudden they have a surge of strong magic, which just like makes it more even.
Yeah, would be interesting because you could have somebody where if they're ever able to get to the point where they can track these readings and like predict it, they may be like, okay, we need somebody to go against this large mass star user, and you are about to have a flare season, so out you go. You're up. You drew the short straw. So sorry.
Yeah, this is something that we can't do, actually. It is really hard for us to predict solar magnetic activity.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can imagine a whole industry built around trying to solve this problem, because that's how it works too. When you're in a world, like you focus on solving the important problems to you. And so we haven't focused on that because it hasn't been very important to us, but it sure would be to them.
Yes, indeed.
I can just imagine somebody being really like cranky or really like, explosive with bad mood and stuff. And someone's like, what's up with him? He's like, don't worry about it. He's flaring. It's
okay.
That's good. I think that between the consistency of the effects and how high mass stars are extremely consistent,
mm-hmm.
I think we might end up more around the middle. Does that feel right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
And then consistency, I think, is also very easy. So this is about how if we look across user to user, star to star, how do the rest of these variables sit and how do they shift? And for the most part, none of them are really going to shift. I mean, maybe not the highest. It may be around here or here because of our reliability and ease of use being a little lower.
Mm.
But I personally don't think it's going to go much lower than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a star. It's set at birth, like birth and kind of adolescence. And then everything else is you get what you get.
Get what you get.
Oh, my brain went to another dark place.
Share.
Please share.
Okay, well, the first dark place was basically like another Holocaust, but trying to use that to collect people's magical potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second dark thought was basically incels and like all of the like a bunch of low, like weak magic users feeling like they got the short end of the stick. And feeling like that, like they deserve more.
That would probably happen.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. So that is, whoops, that's not what I wanted. That is the blueprint.
Woohoo!
Ooh.
We've got it all mapped out. And I don't quite know how I can share this PDF we'll find
I think we can probably make a drive folder available to the public so we can share files in there.
Yeah.
I think
at the very least, this is here and you can take a screenshot of this if you want. So that is the blueprint. That was the main target of this episode. And silly Clark at the beginning thought that because we were all familiar with the blueprint, this would go faster.
I think because we were all familiar with the blueprint, it went slower because we had so many thoughts.
It's like, I won't have to explain as much. We'll get right through it. No, that just meant we got to explore more. Now that we've gone through the blueprint, there's a couple things we need to hammer out. One is what happens when you die. And then we need to start talking about magical effects. I think we've already got a huge host of patterns, rules, and limitations that if we got into actually planning this, we would need to get it all written out and get things mapped to the different stages and all of that. But we know what those are. So what happens to your star when you die? I mean, I suppose it could still float around and then you either have to actively try and integrate it or actively destroy it.
I mean, so there are so many myths from around the world that say that when you die, your soul goes up into the sky and becomes the stars that we see. And like, what if that's where stars come from?
I like it.
I love it. Or at the very least, they're hanging out like out in the stratosphere until they eventually burn out,
Yeah.
which that would mess with their constellations.
Not at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, like they are tethered to this human life, but then once the human is gone, its tether isn't here anymore, so it can um go to its rightful place in the heavens.
I like that because then if you got to a far enough advanced society, they could go star skimming and start scooping up these stars from the
Star
stratosphere.
skimming.
Yes.
So you could have sky pirates, everybody fighting for these magical stars of dead people.
Amazing.
But it's like maybe it's so that's their graveyard is kind of the sky, right? If your star is floats back up there, and so they're like grave robbers, these sky pirates that go star skimming.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there might be a moment where you could attempt to catch the star.
Yeah.
And then if you're successful, I think it happens pretty quickly, but if you're successful, you could then try and add it into your orbit or trying to destroy it to immediately dissipate it instead of waiting for it to die on its own.
Yes.
Maybe it's like an organ donor thing. Like somebody says, yes, I agree to let you catch my star to like dissipate it somewhere where there's like a sick child or something to heal them or something like that.
And I would
these would
like,
be
nope.
these would all be the low mass stars because the high mass, well, most of them, unless you get like, unless you get a high mass star person that dies like as a teenager before their star burns out, most of the stars that last longer than their humans would be the low mass ones.
Mm-hmm. And even if somebody died in war, I'm not sure I would want to try and steal a high mass star because that's just putting the doom of Damocles over yourself. Because you just upped your
dangerous
power. You also just gave yourself a ticking clock.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So the next thing we kind of need to figure out is magical effects. Now, there are any number of ways that we can go. So I actually want to hear what you guys are most interested in, because at this point, it could be very standard blend of fantasy magic with elemental magic, healing magic. Like you could do a hodgepodge, you could do the standard thing, which if we were doing lit RPG is probably the direction we would go. But what are you guys interested in?
I feel like it should be some sort of transformation magic like alchemy, because that is what stars do. They take matter and transform it into other matter. The other things are like light, so maybe illusion magic. And like Lovis said, growing things, because photosynthesis. Yeah, so I feel like it should be limited to stuff that stars and photons and light actually can do.
Okay. And I just realized that I need to move this over here. So this is where I've been taking notes. We've got a whole bunch of stuff on all the different things. We're now currently sitting with effects. So transformation magic, I like. So we're just getting some general things. Transformation magic, light magic. I think there's definitely going to be some kind of heat manipulation. And growth, I put life in there just in general if you wanted to get a little more metaphorical.
Love it.
And that is four classes of magic. I guess the other question is whether the stage of the star changes the type of magic you have access to. That might be overly complicated. It would make sense matching it to that, but at the same time, that could make it extra complicated in explaining all of it.
What you mean, like there would be a progression from light
you're in the
to
final
growth
stage
to
of your
heat
star's
to...
life, which means you are entirely growth and life focused, or something like that.
Well, I mean, stars can do all of these things at all stages of their life, except for transformation magic.
Okay.
They can only do that once they start fusing. So I think that only people who have who are not pre-main sequence. If you are pre-main sequence, so like if you're a kid, then maybe you can do like little illusions or like, you know, maybe help a single plant grow. But after that, your magic gets stronger and you get access to transformation magic.
So then can everybody do all of these?
If we did say it was really easy to use, but if we made it harder to use, then people could train in all of these areas. But I also think it's fine if everyone can do all of these, but like to different degrees based on their own skill level.
Yeah, and we could also add a common thing where personality often pushes you towards a specific one, and then
like
doing
an
the others.
affinity for one.
Yeah, you just have an instinctive feel for a specific thing.
I like this. It kind of feels broad enough that you can still really play with it and explore it, but it gives you like parameters, you know, with this fusion and light and heat and stuff. I think we could work with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because then that was going to be part of my question. We talked about how your star determines everything, and depending on the direction we wanted to go, we could talk about whether the star even determined what magic you had access to. It sounds like for us, it is mostly about, it tells us clearly what kind of magical potency we're looking at and what potential obstacles you're going to run in long term, which will have less of like an immediate tactical implication from person to person beyond like this is going to be a super powerful person. Beyond that, you won't look at somebody's star and say, oh, they're a fire user, or oh, they're an ice user, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's fine.
One like really tiny consequence of this that I just want to share because it tickles me is that like if all teenagers have some weak illusion magic, at least everyone is using them to clear up acne. Every single person, everyone has smooth skin. It's like the Scott Westerfeld's Pretties series.
Yeah, which I think that would be good because it's not very good illusion magic. So like it's fuzzy and indistinct. So you know.
It's like putting a filter on your phone. Your face goes all blurry. What are you hiding?
I think that works because at that point, kids and teenagers are at the same magical level as weak magical creatures. Like not enough to really be dangerous, but enough for it to be impactful.
It gives a whole new meaning to PMS, pre-main sequence.
That would mean though that high mass star users might actually be very dangerous as children too. If they just they haven't hit their main sequence yet, but there's just more magic there. So what is normally at manageable levels for kids, for them might be just over the border to dangerous. Not super dangerous, not like when they hit main sequence.
That means there are probably schools that parents can send their high mass star kids to if they can't like control them or figure out how to deal. Like imagine being a low mass star parent to an O star child. Like you're gonna send them to the home for high mass stars kids. Yeah.
I'm just picturing the bumper sticker, proud parent of a high mass star.
Definitely. Just like brings the whole struggle of like truly gifted children who can't quite control their they're just like overwhelmed. And they're just like, no, I can do so much. I could do so much more than this.
So
we also are assuming that these are humans using this magic.
We are. That is true.
Yeah. Just say if they were like another animal that didn't take as long to reach adolescence, then this wouldn't be as much of an issue.
Which as a side note, because Moiya does a lot of non-human races in her podcast, which is one of the reasons
Yes.
I love it. One of the categories we could add, I'm just going to put this in here, is gravitational,
Ooh,
gravitational powers.
flying.
But I'm just going to say that's for non-humans.
Okay.
Because then what you could do is through magic, they effectively gain opposable thumbs. But then as children, they don't.
So like your dog.
Because they could just levitate
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, you could have dogs or cats or other like actual animals without us having to anthropomorphize them at all. Um, that this connection to the stars was their point in evolution where they shifted to being a more effective race because they could shift into being full tool users as adults.
Hell yeah.
Hunting would be interesting. It's just a cat like
Well,
pulling a mouse towards it or something.
there's all kinds of limitations and stuff that we could put on that, which we would get into what they can and can't grab, the distance, how much they can move, and similar things that we would want to go through in terms of all of these others, right? Is figuring out how much is too much. That's part of the testing phase. Like how much light is too much light? How far away? What does that look like? How do the illusions function? Those are all things that we would really, really need to explore before we actually wrote this. But I think we've got enough for this last section, which as I think it's officially
Yes.
just going to be called the narrative shenanigans now.
It really is. That's what I'm going to title it. Yes.
That may just be our last part in general. It's on to the shenanigans.
On to the shenanigans.
Magic shenanigans and narrative shenanigans. That's the second half of our series.
And the first part is science shenanigans.
Okay. I think we're good here. I think we're in a good place to stop. And that means we can come back and pick up in this next one. So with that, Moiya, go ahead and plug any other creators you want to, or tell us more about you, where people can find you. We'll put links in the description below.
Oh
Just
my.
go.
So many. I mean, I basically spend all of my life consuming content. So you can find me on Twitter at GoAstroMo. You can find all of the work I do on my website, moiyamctier.com. I have a podcast called Exolore that you can find wherever you get your podcasts. I have the book, The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy, coming out in August, but you can pre-order it already. Just search for The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy. And the Multitude shows are really great. That is the podcast collective that Exolore is a part of. They have something for everyone: spirits for mythology buffs, horse for people who really like basketball, join the party for people who like real play tabletop podcasts. So like, yeah, it's a Multitude is where it's at.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for continuing to do this craziness with us. And Lovis, what about you?
Yes, well, I mean, yes, thank you so much for joining us. This was so much fun. My cheeks hurt from smiling. This is so
That's
good.
what happened last time too.
It's what happened last time. We stopped recording. We were like, but yes, you can find me on Ecofictology, the YouTube channel. And that is where I just nerd out over ecofiction, how to read it, how to write, not how to read it, but how I read it and how I write it. And this is part of how we use it as a science communication tool. So you can find me there. You can also join the Rewilding Our Stories Discord server if you're interested in all things ecofiction.
And Ecofictology is where the last episode in this series with Moiya is going to be. And I even had notes to do this in the middle. If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe both to myself and hopefully to Ecofictology. And if you want to know more about the Magic System Blueprint, I'm going to put links to videos probably over here, I think is how it all maps out. You can get the book on Amazon. Or if you ever find me in person at a conference, that is the only place that you can get the Magic System Blueprint in hardback.
Ooh.
Just saying.
Just saying.
So I think that is all for now. Thank you so much, Lovis and Moiya and everybody else who is watching. That's all we got. So whatever you do, get out of here and keep writing and stay awesome.